South African Communist Party has remained in the forefront of the political landscape for over 80 years. We take a look at how the party sees itself, the present political situation, and its role in affecting social change.
The formation of the SACP was inspired largely by the victory of the Russian Revolution in 1917. The party was very much inspired by the politics of the Third International, of an active communist party rooted amongst the masses and in the working class and fighting for the overthrow of capitalism. At its founding, in its early years, it had thought that, you build the party on the basis of the better organized sections of the working class, which was the white working class at that time. It starts with, in fact, the lessons learned from the Rand Revolt. And thereafter, of course, another important development was the passage of the Industrial Conciliation Act, which sort of gave trade union rights to white workers only, and actually de-recognized black workers as employees or as workers. And also those were the beginnings of the white workers really firmly entrenching themselves on the side of the white ruling bloc. The party was to realize that it is actually the black working class that should be and would be the backbone of the working class struggle in South Africa. The core of the Native Republic thesis, which of course was largely instigated by the Third International, was that much as the struggle in South Africa should be regarded as a struggle for socialism, but the most immediate pressing problem and political question that had to be settled in South Africa was the national question. In other words, the liberation of black people, the end to racism, which will then provide a platform on which then to pursue a socialist struggle. The party forged a very close relationship with the African National Congress, and also quite a number of prominent African National Congress leaders were also party leaders in the underground. The one principle that is even useful to us now that communists evolved at that time was that communists, wherever they are working, they must respect the mandate of those organizations in which they work. What then that burning also did was to bring even closer together the functioning and the relationship between the SACP and the ANC.
Throughout the 1960s, the former Soviet Union played an important role in keeping the ANC alive. The South African Communist Party's close links with the superpower allowed it to exercise sizable influence in the ANC on both a practical and ideological level.
Most communist parties in the world that were aligned to the Soviet Union were very much heavily influenced by the international line, from Moscow.
The Soviet bloc actually made a lot of sense to me, including the questions of centralism, economic planning, and everything structured. And it is much later that one began to understand that there were slight problems in relation to how things were done, the economic development itself. I remember Ray Simons, talking about the Soviets being able to go to the moon when they were not yet ready to solve things on Earth. Some of us understood that there was something slightly not in order. It's much later that we began those debates about what went wrong with socialism. We're not quite critical because we're following this particular line. There was a line, so we're following a line, and would say in Zulu, Utinu line, and uline would then be the correct view that we expressed. So criticism was very limited. And if criticism is limited, critical thought sometimes is limited.
our functioning also was in a way influenced by the fact that we're very close to the African National Congress. That's the sort of influence that the ANC and SACP has always had on one another. It wasn't just a one-way process.
The ANC itself said at its Morogoro conference in the late 60s that the ANC was not a socialist organization, but it was trying to make a national liberation in a world context which was characterized by the dramatic shift from capitalism to socialism.
And yet, by the late 1980s, the Soviet Union was undergoing substantial change. Its eventual collapse created tensions inside the SACP and indirectly between the ANC and itself.
In any alliance, there are bound to be contradictions. In many instances, those contradictions, if they come out, it's healthier, provided we manage them correctly. As a communist, I always believe that society moves forward precisely because of contradictions. Contradictions between the main class enemies, as well as contradictions within the people's camp. I would say that the challenge in the alliance is that we are able to weld those contradictions amongst the people in order to actually push forward the revolution. There is no contradiction, in the SACP seeking to place itself as the vanguard of the working class, its leadership of the working class, and being in the alliance. In any case, a stronger working class, a stronger SACP also means a stronger ANC. But much more importantly also it means a stronger government, because in the light of the global pressures on our government, what is our government's source of strength? It's actually the people.
The sudden unbanning of the resistance movement meant that they quickly had to confront very new conditions. Combining legal mass mobilization and negotiations proved no easy task and created much internal debate and discussion.
I don't think that at any particular time there was a deliberate moment when people said, what's the influence of the SACP on us? But there was more an influence, a subtle influence deriving out of the move towards the collapse of socialism. And many of the things that we had for a long time held up to as a dogma were beginning to be questioned.
I think that the demise of the old Soviet bloc was obviously very traumatic for people like myself who had devoted their adult lives to communism. But it also has been a liberation in a strange way as well, because it's no good clinging to something that isn't working. It's no good believing what is unbelievable. And I think it's very important to draw the awkward but correct lessons from that demise. That was one of the reasons why we didn't abandon the party.
And because we didn't have the critical, some of us, not all of us, the critical mind and the ability to criticize and look broadly at things, then even the critical debate began to go haywire, all kinds of directions, and others going to the far left and to the far right. And I think it's at that particular time that the SACP, as having a molding ideology in the ANC, begins to, that molding ideology begins to wane within the ANC. But as we go towards negotiations and others, we begin to have friends in the West.
The emphasis has to move, and will move now, to a debate and discussion of political and economic points of view as part of the process of negotiation.
And we begin to embrace many things from the West. And cynically speaking, you could say that we begin to get diluted. Some of us were still in the camps. I was in Uganda. And when we heard about this negotiation and some of the agreements, especially in 1991, we were close to saying that we're not coming back to South Africa. We're close to saying that the leadership has sold out. It had to be Chris who came to the camps to explain to us these negotiations and persuade us to accept the negotiations. Those of us who were in the party units in Uganda, we had to have feverish meetings trying to understand what has happened to our leadership.
That debate partly also was sparked by the proposals by Joe Slovo for some kind of sunset clauses. We think that, in fact, it was a very healthy debate which helped not just the party but the movement as a whole. So it was not divisions, but it was a very healthy and necessary debate, which we feel, in fact, should even be continuing more now about choices that we face in South Africa's transition.
One of the most important choices for the SACP during the negotiations period was that of its leader, Chris Hani. He chose to turn down a position in the ANC in favour of the General Secretaryship of the party. Hani saw the mobilisation of the working class and the building of the SACP as a key to the fundamental transformation of South Africa. It was a political choice that was ultimately to cost Hani his life. A right-wing assassin gunned him down in the driveway of his home. The SACP had lost its leader and the nation a hero.
The anger that was expressed after the assassination of Comrade Chris, I wouldn't say the ANC reined it in. I wouldn't put it in those words. I would rather say that the ANC was able to respond to it and channel it towards a constructive political path, which was actually to mobilize our people behind the setting of an election date and mobilization of our people for the elections themselves.
Hani's murder provided the momentum for an election date to be set. Millions of South Africans went to the polls for the first time to cast their vote. The overwhelming victory of the ANC-led alliance ushered in a new era for the ANC and SACP. It demanded creative thinking to confront the new challenges that lay ahead.
I think that as a communist, part of my job is to ask the medium and longer term strategic questions, and to keep asking whether what we're doing in the present collectively as a broad ANC-led movement, whether it has a strategic vision, whether we're not losing that strategic vision. As South African communists, we've made the choice to remain within a broad mass movement, which in South Africa is led by the ANC. And we think that's exactly where socialists should be. Socialists shouldn't be away from where millions and millions of ordinary people are. They should be in the midst of that. We're giving ourselves a very hard task as an SACP. We're saying we must be effective MPLs, we must be effective cabinet ministers as communists within the wider context of the ANC, and yet we must never lose sight of our strategic objectives.
Because of the necessity to prioritize the national liberation struggle, which was correct, I'm not saying that it was wrong, we never really quite adequately looked at specific forms of socialist politics, particularly during a period like this. We never fully anticipated that, such that the key challenge, therefore, now is how do we assert socialist politics.
But the debates going on in the SACP reflect that dynamic tension that there will always be between assuming responsibility, as we must, for democratic governance on the one hand, and not throwing away our principles and socialist vision. And that mixture makes for, we hope, a creative tension, but it's a tension.
It's very clear to me that the working people and the poor people are demanding change. Those challenges must be confronted. If the SACP fails to confront those challenges, it is going to fade into history as an anachronistic organization, which is not relevant anymore.
We asked, what does the SACP's relationship with the ANC mean for its party activists in the community?
You are not going to hold workers, you're not going to hold party activists, in Tembisa, okay, who feel that the local government in Tembisa is not listening to them, okay, is doing whatever, and that they are not going to mobilize their branches against an undemocratic or an unconsulted increase in whether in water tariffs or in rent or whatever.
This alliance has thrived precisely on that. Issues that come up and then they actually get debated and we thresh them out.
There's been a shift within the ANC's political and economic direction. The problems are largely informed by us moving away from the positions defined by the Freedom Charter, the Reconstruction and Development Program, and even our own manifesto. We believe the state has adopted policies that are more favorable to business than to labor. And I think they don't make any apology of that. The key imperative of government is to attract foreign direct investment. And no matter what that does to the economy, if it's part about driving down labor standards, if it's about ensuring that there's less taxes that have to be paid, and in that way have less resources available to address the backlogs caused for apartheid, who in the main visit themselves on working class communities. COSATU would be disloyal to its members and not a trade union if it were to follow a program or allow a program to be implemented in the country under the guise of the alliance that completely decimates jobs, deindustrializes our society, and ravages the working class even more than they are. So we'd never be party to that.
We cannot run away from the fact that much of what has happened post-1994 has been the result of new class interests within the ANC. Class interests that almost coalesce with an emerging new bourgeoisie, an emerging new elite, both internationally as well as domestically. And that has been reflected in policies that the government has adopted.
There is a problem with self-enrichment. There is a problem when people who have aligned themselves to our communities, both in their struggles and in the conditions that they've lived with, suddenly all move out of the townships into the fancy white areas and we're not doing anything about the townships. Of course, people start to think, is this a movement about personal enrichment? And in many cases, the kind of corruption that we've seen, unfortunately, amongst our own comrades feeds into that perception.
The politics of governance and the politics of access to resources has influenced to some extent our values and our beliefs and our attitudes and indeed our behavior.
The effect of changing political values and new opportunities for members of the liberation movement gave rise to serious questions. Questions that centered around the commitment to transforming the economy and empowering black workers.
Beginning to say the commanding heights of the economy, certain sections of the economy must remain in state hands. In addition to that, there must be a development of social ownership, where ownership is not accruing to individuals. Formations that actually participate in the so-called black economic empowerment groupings. Clear social ownership must be part of it. Otherwise, we're going to create what we call an Irish coffee scenario. You see, that Irish coffee scenario means that you will have your coffee at the bottom, black at the bottom, with a white cream. That means the actual cream of the economy remains primarily in white hands, and you'll have sprinkles of chocolate on top of the cream, which means that very few blacks are going to be stinking rich, and then they will represent black economic empowerment.
The environment of capitalism, as it is exercised today in South Africa, is beginning to really have its toll on our cadres, the SACP and the ANC, and is beginning to some extent swallow us.
If I had chosen to be in a position where I was earning 10 or 20 times more than I am now, I could not honestly sit here and look you in the eye and say that my perspectives on how society should be changed would remain the same as when I was an activist.
Chris Hani's values and those kind of working class values is something that we still need to re-inject in the SACP, never mind the ANC. You look at the SACP local government councillors, you look at some of our SACP, some of our councillors, some of our SACP MPs, and you wonder, where has communism gone? And if this is communism, what is capitalism?
Capitalism now is just a forward march of imperialism, which is a forward march of exploitation, a forward march of oppression even, and a forward march to poverty.
The ANC's capitalist-friendly economic policies have given rise to very sharp differences concerning economic policy. Will the path of putting profits before people triumph, or will the stated goal of putting people before profits become a reality?
The alliance won't stay together anymore on the basis of our historical relationships and historical commitments to each other. I think we still all have the same objectives. We certainly still talk the talk that says we all have the same objectives. But some of us may talk left and walk right, which I think is part of the problem that we have, that we're not necessarily being honest enough. And if the alliance is, if the leading party of the alliance is going to continue to choose that route, then there's going to be difficulties. Because while the ANC leads the alliance, it's an alliance of equals. And the other parties of the alliance will be compelled to take a different route and to disassociate from the alliance as a result of the ANC refusing to ensure that the policy prescriptions imposed on our country are not those that are jointly agreed to.
When a leadership does not lead, and when it does not go to its grassroots, and when it does not learn from its grassroots and reflect that in the way that it leads, it becomes distant. It has demobilized its own constituency, and as a result, we are sitting here fighting gear and many other things when in fact that was never the necessary outcome.
The party has entered the new millennium, facing very real questions and challenges. Challenges that it will have to address if it is to survive as a force capable of shaping the future of South Africa.
The one major challenge that the party faces is being a party of the masses and being able to attract to its embrace your working class, your rural poor women, your working class women, and giving that leadership. But really being the SACP, that's a major challenge, and being quite clear about what it is that we stand for and how we're going to be achieving it.
If the ANC were to become a fully fledged bourgeois capitalist party, exactly when we would break. But if it becomes that, a party of the elite, the bourgeoisie, standing for unbridled capitalism, then we will definitely break as the Communist Party. We'll have nothing to do with an ANC like that.
It makes no sense to have an agreement that's basically the glue that holds the alliance together, and in this place the Reconstruction and Development Program, you don't implement it and then expect the alliance to remain together. And I think the impacts of the policies of GIA are now showing that we can no longer easily go along. There's not a willingness, and we should not go along with economic policies that's not having a desired effect to rebuild our economy.
COSATU delegates singing "Away with GIA," the country's macroeconomic policy.
See, with this privatization program, the party has cadreship that must be seen to be mobilizing against privatization, that will be seen physically leading protest action. And if the party can allow its cadreship to do that clearly and take platforms and address and express views on this particular matter, then the party will have played its role. We must be putting up clear theoretical framework, why we are opposed to privatization, and what is the alternative.
One of the key challenges is actually to assert the hegemony, struggle to assert the hegemony of the working class, and that this stage, this phase, of our revolution must actually be led by the working class. We would like to assert that as the Communist Party unambiguously, much as we understand there are other forces in society, but it is the working class that must set the agenda. And one thing that we are saying now is that if we really want to strengthen the Communist Party now, it must just really transform and assist the working class to act as a political force for itself, because no one else is going to act in the interest of the working class other than the working class itself.